In his 99 years, it's hard to guess how many people His Royal Highness met, how many hands he shook, how many events he attended. Far easier to count are the number of television interviews he granted.
You go back to the Great Exhibition, where what the Prince Consort was trying to do was to try and say, look, you've got to have a marriage of art and manufacturing and engineering in order to produce good stuff.
But he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
For decades, Prince Philip stood quietly beside Queen Elizabeth, a steadfast presence at every royal event. But in his final years, their closeness began to wane, revealing a side of their marriage few ever saw. What caused this surprising distance? And what truths did he share before his passing? Before his death, Prince Philip finally admitted why he refused to live with the Queen, a revelation that shed new light on the private challenges behind their polished royal image. Behind the scenes lay secrets and struggles that changed everything in their final moments together. Hidden truth behind marriage. Philip's early life had been full of struggles. Born into the Greek royal family, he was forced to leave the country as a baby in 1922, hidden inside a fruit crate during their exile. His family had lost their power, and from then on, his life was anything but stable. His mother suffered from mental health issues and was sent away, and his father was often absent. With no real home, Philip spent much of his childhood moving between relatives and boarding schools in Europe. By the time he and Elizabeth saw each other again in the 1940s, she was no longer a little girl. Now a young woman, she was charmed by the confident and handsome naval officer Philip had become. She quickly fell for him. Her father, King George, noticed the growing closeness between them, but wasn't in a hurry to give his blessing. He insisted they wait until Elizabeth turned 21 before they could get engaged. Some say he was hoping she might change her mind and consider a more suitable match. But Elizabeth's heart was set. The couple officially got engaged in 1947 and married later that year. It seemed like the beginning of a strong partnership. But their lives took a sharp turn in 1952 when Elizabeth suddenly became queen at just 25 years old. This changed everything, especially for Philip, who now had to step into the background as she led the monarchy. Their relationship also faced pressure from the outside world. After World War II, people in Britain were still recovering from the trauma of the conflict. Philip's German connections raised concerns, especially since his sisters had married men linked to the evil German regime. Some in the royal circle worried that this might hurt the public's view of the royal family. There were whispers that Philip was too German or too foreign for Britain's future queen. To help calm these concerns, Philip gave up his Greek and Danish titles, became a British citizen, and took on the last name Mountbatten. Still, people talked. Many believe the royal family quietly worked to present Philip as more British, hoping to win over the public and secure the image of a united royal couple. Struggles of a royal consort. Being married to the Queen of England might sound like a dream, but for Prince Philip, it came with real sacrifices, and not just the kind seen in fairy tales. When Elizabeth became queen in 1952, Philip had to make some tough choices. One of the biggest? He gave up his career in the Royal Navy. He was a talented officer with a bright future, and he loved the work. But once Elizabeth stepped into her role as monarch, he had to step back. In 1992, he admitted how hard that decision was, calling it disappointing. Without the Navy, he suddenly felt lost, unsure of what his new role really meant. Royal biographer Tim Heald later shared that Philip often felt trapped in his ceremonial position, always beside the Queen, but never quite in the spotlight himself. And it wasn't just about losing his job. There were other moments that quietly stung. At Elizabeth's coronation, Philip had to kneel before his wife in front of the whole world. Vanity Fair described the moment as humiliating for a man who had always been proud and independent. He reportedly didn't want to do it, feeling it made him look small in public. Then came the surname Battle. Philip had taken on the name Mountbatten when he became a British citizen. Naturally, he wanted his children to have that name too. But Queen Mary and Prime Minister Winston Churchill had other ideas. They insisted that the royal family keep the name Windsor. Philip was deeply hurt by this demand. According to reports, he once said in frustration, "I'm just a bloody amoeba," meaning he felt like he had no identity or importance of his own. Adding to that, Philip never quite fit in with the palace crowd. Some courtiers thought he was too outspoken, too rough around the edges, and too foreign. It was reported that they even called him the Hun, a cruel nickname that reflected how unwelcome he sometimes felt. It wasn't until 1960 that Elizabeth made a move to ease some of that tension. She declared that their children would carry the name Mountbatten Windsor, combining both family names. It was a small but meaningful gesture, showing Philip that his role and name mattered. Still, these early struggles left their mark. Philip didn't sit around feeling sorry for himself, though. Instead, he looked for ways to find purpose outside the crown. A royal bickering couple. One of the most talked-about arguments between the two happened during their 1954 royal tour of Australia. While staying in a chalet, Prince Philip stormed out in anger. Moments later, Queen Elizabeth ran after him, clearly furious. She shouted for him to come back and even threw a tennis racket and a pair of shoes at him. The entire scene was caught on camera by a film crew. But before the footage could go public, the royal press secretary, Richard Colville, made sure it was destroyed. Not long after, Elizabeth went up to the crew, calm as ever, and said, "I'm sorry for that little interlude, but as you know, it happens in every marriage." It was a rare and honest moment that showed even the Queen's marriage faced its fair share of rainy days. This wasn't a one-time thing. Their love was deep, but it also came with strong emotions. Prince Philip was known for being blunt. He didn't hold back even when talking to Elizabeth. According to royal biographer Sarah Bradford, he would sometimes call her a bloody fool or say she was talking rubbish. But Elizabeth was no pushover. She had her own sharp responses. People close to them say she would snap right back with things like, "Oh, Philip, do shut up. You don't know what you're talking about." Their arguments weren't hidden from those around them. Royal correspondent James Whittaker described their fights as blazing rows. He remembered moments when Elizabeth told Philip to shut up during their disagreements. These weren't polite little spats. They were real heated exchanges. But that's also what made their relationship strong. They didn't pretend. They fought, they made up, and they moved on. Even on official tours, the tension sometimes showed. In 1976, during a trip to the United States, American writer Susan Crossland witnessed one such moment. Philip started ranting, and Elizabeth, clearly annoyed, cut him off with a firm, "Shut up." No royal filter, just a frustrated wife speaking her mind. Philip's bold personality sometimes made things tricky in public. He was known for saying things that raised eyebrows. He once told a group of deaf children at a loud concert, "No wonder you are deaf." On another occasion, he joked about a blinded cadet's tie. These remarks made headlines, and Elizabeth often had to step in to smooth things over with grace and calm. Start of his escape. The story of Prince Philip's quiet rebellion didn't begin with a grand exit. It started with small signs of restlessness. While Queen Elizabeth took on the heavy crown and duties of the monarchy, Philip was left navigating a role that felt more like a cage than a calling. He wasn't king. He wasn't in charge. He was the consort, expected to smile, support, and stay a step behind. And for a man like Philip, that was never going to be enough. The real shift came in 1956. That year, Philip left on what was officially called a 5-month Commonwealth tour aboard the Royal Yacht Britannia. The trip was planned as a way for him to represent the Queen at events in countries like Australia and New Zealand, including the Olympics. According to reports, it was actually Elizabeth's idea to test the yacht and keep her husband involved in royal duties. But as the trip unfolded, it became clear this was more than a diplomatic tour. It was Philip's first real taste of freedom since his wife became queen. Vanity Fair later revealed that Philip stretched the trip longer than expected, using it as a break from the tight and formal life at Buckingham Palace. Royal biographer Sarah Bradford noted that Philip felt stifled in his role and enjoyed being at sea, where he didn't have to bow to protocol, where he could just be one of the guys again. A man among men, she called it. This was the beginning of his escape. Not just from the palace, but from the version of himself the royal family expected him to be. The long absence didn't go unnoticed. The media picked up on it quickly, and The Sun reported rising suspicions about trouble in the royal marriage. Whispers of Philip's unhappiness turned into louder rumors of possible affairs. Fueling the gossip was a comment from his close friend and equerry, Michael Parker, who jokingly referred to the tour as a stag do, according to Newsweek. There was no proof of anything scandalous, but the damage was done. The Daily Mail later shared that Queen Elizabeth kept a brave face in public, but privately, she was hurt and embarrassed. And this wasn't just about one trip. Philip had long been connected to the Thursday Club, a rowdy men's lunch group in Soho, known for its drinking and wild conversations. He'd been seen there both before and after marrying Elizabeth, rubbing shoulders with famous figures like Peter Ustinov and David Niven. The club was infamous for its risky behavior, and Philip's involvement only added to the whispers that he hadn't been completely tamed by royal life. So while the 1956 tour might look official on the surface, it marked something much deeper. It was the moment Philip began to slip away, not from Elizabeth personally, but from a life that didn't feel like he'd... Ballerina in Philip's life. As the Queen settled into her role, he started pulling away step by step. What seemed like casual outings or friendly meetings were real signs that Philip was becoming more rebellious, craving freedom from palace rules and the shadow of the throne. One of the most talked about early moments came in 1948, when Philip visited Pat Kirkwood, a popular British actress and dancer. Elizabeth was heavily pregnant with Charles at the time. Philip didn't just meet her backstage, they were seen together multiple times. One report says they even danced until dawn. That wasn't something a traditional royal husband would usually do, and people noticed. Pat always insisted it was nothing romantic, and her letters backed her up. But the fact that Philip never stepped in to publicly defend her raised eyebrows. It showed that he either didn't care about the gossip or didn't feel the need to play by royal rules. Then there was Galina Ulanova, a Russian ballerina who was much older than Elizabeth. Philip admired her work and had a photo of her tucked in his belongings. That detail alone hinted at his growing independence. He wasn't being secretive, just unapologetically himself. The real turning point came in the 1950s and 60s, when Philip's life started looking more like that of a man trying to reclaim control. He began spending time with people outside the usual royal circle. He was seen at clubs and parties, often without Elizabeth. He connected with figures like Penny Knatchbull in the 1970s over shared interests like carriage driving. Their bond lasted decades. Their closeness was a clear sign that Philip was finding companionship where he felt most understood. The media had a field day, especially when foreign outlets claimed he was sneaking off to see a mystery woman in London. The palace even had to step in and deny it. Philip, as always, met the attention with sarcasm. "How could I possibly get away with it?" he joked. "I've had police with me every day since 1947. But by then, one thing was clear. This wasn't about scandal. It was about a man slowly breaking away from life. The father who struggled to connect. Prince Philip may have been a prince, a duke, and the Queen's husband, but when it came to being a father, things weren't so simple. Especially with his eldest son, Charles, Philip's relationship was often cold, distant, and confusing. He wasn't the kind of dad who gave warm hugs or gentle advice. Instead, he believed in discipline, hard work, and pushing his kids to be strong. That's the kind of upbringing he had, and he passed it on without much question. But Charles was different. Sensitive, quiet, and emotional, Charles didn't respond well to his father's tough love approach. Philip wanted to raise a leader, someone who understood duty and wasn't afraid of pressure. But Charles just wanted understanding, maybe even comfort. The two of them often clashed. One big argument between them was over Charles's schooling. Philip insisted that he go to Gordonstoun, the same rough Scottish boarding school he had gone to. He believed it taught strength and independence. Charles, on the other hand, hated every minute of it. He once described it as Colditz in kilts, comparing it to a prison. Philip couldn't see why his son disliked it so much. Charles saw it as emotional neglect. That disconnect became a major part of their relationship, one trying to toughen the other just wanting to be heard. This emotional gap followed them for years. Even during grand royal events, Philip often looked out of place. He wasn't a natural royal in the polished, charming way people expected. He'd often look like he wanted to be somewhere else, and that's because he did. Philip was happiest in the quieter corners of royal life, Sandringham, Balmoral, or Windsor, places where he could relax, work with his hands, and not worry about royal duties or public appearances. He loved building things, whether it was sketching designs for furniture or creating carriages. He had a sharp, creative mind and found joy in shaping things himself, away from the spotlight. These quiet hobbies gave him peace in a world that rarely offered any. Improving royal life. He had a strong interest in engineering, and this shaped much of his life. From a young age, he was curious about how things worked. That curiosity followed him into adulthood and into his role within the royal family. Before royal duties took over, Philip studied at naval colleges and served in the British Royal Navy during World War II. This experience shaped his disciplined and practical thinking. It also gave him the chance to work with new technologies and machinery, which deepened his love for engineering and innovation. He brought this mindset into royal life. Many royal homes, like Buckingham Palace, were built long before modern electricity and equipment. Instead of ignoring the issues, Philip rolled up his sleeves and worked to modernize these spaces. He helped upgrade old electrical systems and made areas like kitchens and workshops more efficient for staff. He wasn't just giving orders, he worked alongside engineers and shared his own ideas. Wood Farm. After years of living in the Queen's shadow, following royal rules and putting duty above everything else, Prince Philip finally found his escape, and it wasn't through headlines or scandal. It was through a quiet cottage tucked away in the countryside. In 2017, at the age of 96, Philip retired from public life and moved to Wood Farm, a modest house on the edge of the Sandringham estate. And for the first time in decades, he didn't have to be the Queen's husband. He could just be Philip. Wood Farm was everything Buckingham Palace wasn't. No formality, no schedule, no constant reminders of his title. He could wear what he wanted, eat when he wanted, and live without being followed by cameras or advisors. It was his private world, far from the pressures of royal life and, in many ways, far from the Queen herself. While their bond stayed strong, Philip's retreat to Wood Farm was clearly about needing space, his own space. At Wood Farm, Philip did what made him feel alive. He drove carriages across the fields, something he loved for its speed, challenge, and freedom. He painted, he read, he grilled food himself, and hosted simple meals without a butler or formal dining room in sight. It was a lifestyle that suited him, uncomplicated, quiet, and completely separate from the royal stage he'd stood on for so long. Friends and royal aides have quietly admitted that he seemed lighter at Wood Farm. He didn't have to follow anyone's rules or sit through endless ceremonies. He woke up each day in control of his time, something he'd craved since giving up his naval career when Elizabeth became queen. This little cottage became his reward for a lifetime of sacrifice. A chance to finally breathe without the crown hanging over his head. Even Queen Elizabeth respected his need for distance. She visited him at Wood Farm from time to time, but they no longer lived side by side. It wasn't a cold separation. It was an understanding. She continued with her royal duties, and he found peace in being away from them. After all, he had spent over 70 years playing second fiddle, bowing slightly behind her in public, biting his tongue in meetings, and fitting into a role he never fully enjoyed. Wood Farm wasn't just a retirement home. It was a quiet rebellion. It was where Philip, now free from the royal spotlight, could finally be himself, unfiltered, unbothered, and on his own terms. Living alone and demise. In his final years, Prince Philip chose to live apart from the Queen, settling into a quiet life at Wood Farm, a simple cottage on the Sandringham estate. This wasn't about the distance between them, but about his deep need for independence and space. Away from the public eye and royal routines, Philip found peace in solitude. The calm of Wood Farm allowed him to live on his own terms, free from the usual pressures of royal life. Philip's health was slowly failing, and he had several hospital stays in those last years. Even so, he seemed content living quietly, surrounded by privacy and away from the spotlight. His choice to live away from Buckingham Palace and Windsor was also about not wanting to be a burden to Elizabeth as he grew frailer. It was his way of protecting her from the stress of his health problems while keeping his own dignity intact. When Philip passed away at Windsor Castle, the Queen was at his side. Their partnership had lasted over 70 years, a bond full of love, duty, and complexity. But after his death, the loneliness Elizabeth faced became very clear. The image of her sitting alone at his funeral, limited by COVID restrictions, showed just how deeply she felt the loss. Philip had been her constant support, and without him, she entered a new and difficult chapter. Those close to the Queen said her grief was intense. The silence left by Philip's absence was more than just personal sorrow. It was a shift in her whole life. She wore her engagement ring until her own death, a quiet sign of how much he still meant to her. Although she carried on with her royal duties, the loss shaped her days in a very real way. Looking back, Elizabeth came to realize that letting Philip live apart in those final years had been a mistake. While his choice gave him freedom and spared her the strain of his declining health, It also created a distance that neither of them fully wanted. That separation left her feeling alone when she needed him most. In the end, the Queen understood that their strength came from being together, through the good times and the hard ones. Philip's escape had given him peace, but it also taught her how important it was to face life's challenges side by side. We hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for more amazing stories.